Hello everyone and welcome to Deep Dive. On today's episode, we'll be looking at Yorgos Lanthimos' Bugonia. Bugonia follows two brothers led by Jesse Plemons who kidnap the CEO of a pharmaceutical company played by Emma Stone because they are convinced that she's in fact an alien. Now, it actually took a friend of mine to remind me that this film is a remake and it's a film that I've seen before. It's a Korean film called Save the Green Planet, which I watched years ago when it was on British TV once. It was during the period in which I was discovering world cinema and watched anything. And even after seeing the trailers, I didn't put two and two together because it was just a film that was in the back of my mind that I forgot that I watched. But now, after watching Bugonia, I can say that the two films are actually quite close to one another. They're pretty similar. But before we speak about the film, I'd like to give a bit of context as to my relationship with Yorgos Lanthimos. I discovered Lanthimos at the time that Dogtooth came out. That seemed to be his big international break. And after that, I enjoyed his work. I enjoyed the almost inhuman deadpan approach to filmmaking that he had. But it was at the time that The Favourite came out that I started to grow a bit more disillusioned with his work. And I put that down to the screenwriter that he was working with, Tony McNamara, whose style of writing dialogue is something that I can't stand. And this reached its apotheosis with Poor Things, which, if you've listened to our show, Acid is Bad for Business, then you know that I loathe Poor Things. I can't stand that film, and I know I'm an outlier with this. Because Lanthimos' genre always leaned into black comedy, but what ended up happening was that the comedy just became so juvenile. And I'm not concerned about the idea of something being silly and crass, but the humour was now coming from a point of millennial-styled vulgarity, in that the characters speak with such a directness, but it was just so cringe. Like, the reason that it's funny is because we're writing period pieces, but we just happen to be writing dialogue like it's fucking Has-Been Hotel. And so going into Bugonia, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what kind of Lanthimos film I was getting. But now, having seen it, I can say that it doesn't have that snark of his more recent endeavours, because he's also not working with Tony McNamara. But it also isn't exactly like his old work. It doesn't have that complete approach to the deadpan style. Truthfully, it's somewhere right in the middle. It inhabits both worlds. But I am glad to say that I thoroughly enjoyed this film. So the setup for the film is Teddy, played by Jesse Plemons, kidnaps Michelle, who is the CEO of the pharmaceutical company that Teddy works for, and that's played by Emma Stone. Believing that she's an alien, they kidnap her and keep her in the cellar of their home, wherein they shave off her hair so that she cannot contact her home race. They rub antihistamine cream across her entire body, and they tell her that she must liaise with her Andromedan race in 4 days' time, which is the date that a lunar eclipse is going to happen. Now, that's the setup, and from a narrative perspective, this is all very, very interesting stuff. But the strength of this film lies in the dynamics, the interplay between both of these characters, because there's surprisingly a lot at play here. Jesse Plemons' character, Teddy, is on paper a conspiracy theorist, one who has fallen into complete delusion, one who, when he speaks of the objectivity of the world, he speaks of Big Pharma, he speaks of chemically induced hypnosis. And he talks about it using all of the esoteric lingo that he's completely familiarized himself with. The reality is that Jesse believes in his perception of the world. We're inclined to look at him as a complete outcast to society, someone who is so delusional that it borders on dangerous. But the interesting thing is that Jesse is the character within the film with the strongest moral center. He takes care of his brother Don, who is the other supporting character of the film, who has learning difficulties. And he very often espouses, sometimes with difficulty, because he's a character that believes so wholeheartedly in his mission, but he's also in many ways alien to everyone else. What he's espousing is so out there, is so conspiratorial, that there is a struggle within him. But you can't help see that he's a character who literally wants to save people. He wants to save the earth. And it's so obvious that his intentions are really pure. The only problem is that this results in him sticking foil on his windows, forcing his mentally deficient brother to also take part in his worldview, and ultimately kidnap and torture some woman. I think that many films would take this setup, this scenario, and approach it with a bit of a shallow lens. There's certain obvious stances of how a deluded person or how a person driven towards conspiratorial thinking may have approached this. You can see how this film could have been approached where the ultimate moral lens is, yes, but there's badness on both sides, which this film has that, but it's far more balanced and far more nuanced, but it commits to a moral lens which is very interesting and very unique. Certain viewpoints taken by the characters, particularly Teddy and particularly Michelle, they're going to be challenged by the film at some point. Teddy fully believes that Emma Stone's character is an alien. And the reason that he thinks that is because the spirit of humanity, the human condition, whatever makes someone a human, clearly dwells so much within Teddy, especially when compared with Michelle. When we're first introduced to Michelle, we see that sterility which has become so associated with the Silicon Valley mega boss types. You know, everything in her life is coordinated and lifeless. Her morning routine is essentially the newer version of what Patrick Bateman's was. And then in her day-to-day life, she facilitates the development of drugs and pharmaceuticals which do damage people's lives and communities. What she does, the way she lives her life, is so antithetical to a human being. She's so separate from us that in many ways she is an alien. And I think that the film does a great job at displaying the complexities that come with resistance and rejection towards these lifestyles that are offered by these new figures of power. Because taken as a moral dilemma, everything that Jesse Plemons' character says is true. Michelle doesn't care about her workers. There's a scene in which we learn that Jesse Plemons is actually employed at a place equivalent of an Amazon warehouse, and he speaks to a colleague of his who's injured herself at work. And when he sees this, he has this passion within him to show people, to make people understand that what's happened here is a woman has injured herself through no fault of her own, and the people who are responsible for this are not being held accountable. He's right when he says that communities are suffering, that ecosystems are dying out. Everything that he wants, everything that he believes is a righteous act. But the only conclusion that he can draw in his own naivete is that this person is so inhuman that the only rational response is they can't be human. They must be an alien. No human being could do this, could be so destructive. And so who really is the villain within that? And there's a moral complexity at hand here, which may not have been as successful if it wasn't held together by very strong performances by both Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons. Emma Stone really manages to channel that cutthroat energy. Everything she says, it just comes across as Machiavellian. It's as though she has the propensity to say and do anything to ensure that she maintains some power, to the point that you begin to think that a fundamental aspect of her character is an inability to offer power to another person, to the point that you quickly learn that she is a person willing to say and do nearly anything to ensure this hierarchical dominance, even if that means going along with the delusion of Teddy. But it reaches such levels of insincerity that you don't know what this person believes. You don't know what they are. You don't know what they stand for. Ultimately, you know nothing about this person, and everything that they say is suspect. So then comes the obvious question, what if she is an alien? And I find the way the film deals with this very interesting, because the moment that you as an audience member start to question this, then you are in essence asking the same questions that Teddy is. And so every question that Teddy asks, every action that Teddy does, you are also guilty of. you are now beginning to justify radical responses to situations of extreme consequence. It puts into context certain delusional beliefs or even conspiratorial beliefs that very often they come from a rational need to do good within people. Because if Teddy is correct, then everything he's doing is justified. And fundamentally, regardless of our perception of the world or regardless of our ideologies, we all fundamentally believe that what we're doing is the good thing. And I like that because it's not as though the film is outwardly justifying or rejecting whatever it is that Teddy is doing, but it humanizes it. And it humanizes it in a way that I didn't actually expect, because Lanthimos' work has always felt quite at a distance in the way that he would approach his subjects. Because, in his early work, when you look at something like The Killing of a Sacred Deer, there's a Kubrickian approach in it, perhaps closely associated most with certain elements of something like A Clockwork Orange, where the subjects of those things are also held at a distance, but they're so theatrical in their presentation that they're essentially caricatures. They're almost alien creatures in and of themselves. That is more akin to the lens that Lanthimos would have typically approached this material, but in more of a epic, deadpan presentation. But Bugonia, more than any other Lanthimos film, has a heart. It has a humanism about it. Jesse Plemons, in particular, brings to the film a internal depth to the character which was completely unexpected. There are a couple of really standout scenes where we dive into the abstract internal world of Teddy. They're shot in black and white, and they present to us this symbolic relationship he had with his mother. And immediately it reminded me of a sequence that Buñuel would use when Buñuel would want to present something at his most sentimental. There's a police officer played by Stavros Halkias of Cumtown fame who recalls a pedophilic encounter with Teddy. And the result is that Teddy becomes this fractured but strong and resilient character that is trying so hard to do something heroic for humanity, regardless that all of the wrongs that the world may have presented to him. And from that, you can then look at the form of the film, because then I think that the form and content work so well together. The film is shot in VistaVision, which isn't quite IMAX, but it's not too dissimilar from it. And it seems to be becoming more of a standardized format now. And what you get is just this very large projection. Everything feels big. And that's tied to the fact that Lanthimos also shoots in very, very wide lenses. And so you have these giant vistas, but Lanthimos also likes to do a lot of tracking shots. Often at high speeds, we're following characters and we're moving through this vast world. At the same time, this orchestral theme starts to swell up by Erskine Fendrix. And what you start to feel is that you're really being fed this internal world of Teddy, one that is heroic, one that's large, one that has this weight and importance to it. There's something very large at play here. And yet at the same time, there's something about the over-the-topness of it all, which then makes it feel very pitiable. There's an element of pathos within it all. And it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly where it comes from. But the sum of all the parts together, all I can say is that they really feel as though they have a humanity to it. And even though there is a sequence which is essentially this film's version of the ending montage from Doctor Strangelove, there will always be this vein of black comedy and this kind of humorous lens at the folly of humanity, which may feel a bit misanthropic to some, but I don't think that detracts from the soul of the film. It's just one of the other truths is that human beings are funny in how foolish many of our endeavors may be. But even without all of these deep themes that are peppered throughout the film, it works well on a narrative basis anyway, because you're intrigued as to what's going to happen next. The character dynamics work on a very, very deep and intense level, and the filmic language just knows how to build tension. We're on a ticking clock, and a prophecy is about to take place. I think that the only thing you could call the film out for depends on your opinion and your relationship towards remakes, because the fact of the matter is that compared to the original film, there are a lot of beats that are basically the same. Even Lanthimos' directing style is very akin to certain styles of extreme Korean cinema. I mean, that opening from the film you can take that straight from Parasite. But even so, those minute things aside, I think that this is a great film. And we can rejoice because the Seven curse is finally over. I think that Bugonia is an 8 out of 10.